This house, high and over, at Amersham, was one of the first houses in England to be designed in what became known as the International style. The architect was Amyas Connell, a Rome scholar. The client was Professor Bernard Ashmole, a classical archaeologist who was director of the British School at Rome. The building has all the characteristics of the modern movement. It has white stuccoed walls and ribbon windows in metal frames. The cubic forms remind us strongly of Le Corbusier. This projecting balcony is almost identical with one he used in his villa at Vaucresson. The obligatory roof terrace, with its suggestion of physical culture, had become a symbol of the house as a machine for living in. These metal eyes set into the concrete are for a child's swing. The structure was reinforced concrete, with the column supports running between the windows and forming part of the wall. Not separate pilotis, as in Le Corbusier's buildings, but expressed clearly in the facades. The change in shape of these lower windows has destroyed the continuity of line intended by the architect, and they've become merely holes in a wall. If we look at the original design, these columns were apparent at ground floor as well. You can see this better in an architect's impression. It was an important part of the concept to preserve two bands of windows on this elevation, because this is a facade dominated by horizontals, and the windows relate to the general form of the house and to the apparently floating slab of the roof. This is the most dynamic part of the design, and the architect wanted a sweeping, rather grand statement which reflected this. The aeronautical symbolism of the roof fitted the idea that architecture should capture the excitement of planes and ships, the subject of continuous interest in the 30s. Amyas Connell's suggestion of terraces reminds us of his period in Italy. The house was originally designed with a series of formal terraces cascading down the hillside, and the central axis has been carried through into the garden, ending with the circular pool. It's rather like one of the Renaissance Italian villas, the Villa d'Este at Tivoli. The tall cypress trees at Amersham are very similar, and there's some of the same elegance and monumentality too. Although not fully developed, there are terraces in the immediate area of the house, and they soften the relationship between the house and the hillside. When this house was designed, the architect, Amyas Connell, was 25 years old and had just spent 2 years in Rome at the British School, where he took a particular interest in the work of Michelangelo. It was his first commission, and it produced perhaps the boldest and most modern building to appear in England during the 20s.
What were Professor Ashmole's main objectives when he asked you to put this house on this particular site?
I should think the main objectives were the contour of the site, the maximum intrusion of sun into the house, and also the view. The view, of course, being magnificent from the top of this hill.
And was this the influence on you in your choice of form?
Yes, I think the choice of the Y form solved satisfactorily those three objectives.
Could I ask you whether or not you were in any way influenced by Michelangelo when you were designing this house?
Yes, I think Michelangelo was one of the great influences so far as my thought in architecture was concerned during my period in Rome, and I came to understand much more about an architectural solution to a particular problem through the study of his work. In fact, my part of my thesis was to do a measured drawing, and I chose his design for the Capitol in Rome as being a suitable subject, and spent an enormous amount of time measuring it and also drawing it out.
One can sense that this house was very much influenced by classicism in its design, but could you say something about your feelings at this time towards the international style?
First of all, I think, having come from Rome and this being my first architectural work, I was naturally influenced with the classic form. You talk of the international style. When this house was designed, the phrase didn't exist, and I rather looked upon it as being a work of architecture rather than fitting into any stylistic straitjacket.
Yes. What about the architects of the international style? Did any of them influence you particularly?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I think Corbusier, firstly, and also Bruno Taut. His writings were, to me, of very great interest. Corbusier, I think, because his work reflects an insight into architectural and social history and the architectural forms that resulted from each individual period of social history.
Yes, you have this high regard for the study of history, don't you, as a...
Oh, tremendous. I can't see how any person may project himself into the future without having the true line of descent of history behind him to give him direction.
But although this house has many features that we can recognize as being associated with the international style, it has the roof terrace, it has the fenêtre en longueur, the ribbon window of Le Corbusier, you're saying that this was not really international style. If it wasn't, what was it then, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it was the result of having a problem stated and my having, I hope, solved it satisfactorily.
The entry facade is striking and impressive. As a contrast to the garden front, this view is one of absolute simplicity. The projecting V-shaped canopy and stainless steel doors provide a dramatic focus at the entrance to the house. The interior has been altered, but formerly on entering we would have walked into a rather splendid central space, a hexagon paved with marble. On the far side, to the left, a staircase leads to the upper floor. On the outside, this appears as an angled projection of glass. In the middle is a star-shaped fountain. Its jets shot up to first-floor level, where a circular opening allowed a view into the space below. A real hint of Rome and Michelangelo. At roof terrace level, the hexagon was expressed as the nursery. The wing pointing towards us had no terrace and contained the servants' rooms, with the dining room and kitchen on the ground floor. In the other wings, the living room and library were at ground level, and the bedrooms on the first floor, so that all the rooms could take advantage of the view. But it was at roof level that the view could be really enjoyed. This is a separate world, in which the architectural framework allows the space to flow in a way which can be both intimate and liberating.
This first house by Amyas Connell was an original solution carried through with a high degree of purity and sophistication. Although the form chosen had many practical advantages, it was also a good deal more interesting than many of the more boxy houses of the period. But I think the outstanding feature of High and Over is the way the design illustrates Amyas Connell's admiration for classicism and his understanding of the principles of modern architecture. The house seems to represent the untarnished ideals of a young architect who had been influenced on the one hand by his stay in the British school and on the other by his high regard for the work of Le Corbusier. High and Over was a landmark in the development of modern architecture in Britain and seemed to many at the time to be a refreshing example of a new approach to design.
The idea of a core with elements radiating from it found a different expression in Amyas Connell's next house at Hazelmere for Sir Arthur Lowes Dickinson. This time the staircase became the nucleus, with rooms fanning out from it to take advantage of views to the south and southeast. This is how the house was described in the architectural press at the time.
The staircase is enclosed almost entirely with glass, and from it the extended view to the west and north can be seen. It also admits afternoon sun to the interior of the house. But the views are best enjoyed from the roof garden, which has been planned as a charming retreat. At first sight, the plan appears capricious, although the main circulations are conventional. But on examination, each apparent oddity is found to be based on sound reasoning. And curiously enough, these odd shapes and odder fenestration group into a whole which, though it has its surprises, I think is consistent and harmonious. The design is strangely individual for one in a so-called international manner that professes to conform to function before all other considerations. Anyone acquainted with the work of English domestic architects, if asked to name the probable designer of this house, would unhesitatingly answer, Mr. Connell.
The house was built in reinforced concrete using columns or pilotti to carry the greater part of the load, so that, except in the maid's wing, the walls are merely weather screens. The staircase is cantilevered from a central column which also contains the boiler flues. Like High and Over, the design explores the possibilities of relating a core to other elements. But this time, the stair which forms the nucleus is slotted into the shape of the main rooms in a way that stresses the irregularity of the forms. The transparency of the stair provides contrast to the solidity of the other shapes, whose ribbon windows help to link them together. The almost classical discipline of High and Over has gone, and Connell uses the architectural vocabulary of the modern movement to suggest a different kind of freedom. But as before, the organization is thought of with the imagery of ships and aircraft in mind. We now move on 8 years to this house at Moor Park, which was built in 1937 and which was designed by Connell's architectural partner from New Zealand, Basil Ward. Where this house differs from the two buildings by Amyas Connell that we've seen is in the vigorous and sometimes discordant assemblage of the various architectural elements. In fact, the plan consists of two staggered elements linked centrally. This central portion forms the hall, the circulation spine. At the bottom of the spine, at the front, there's an entry curve leading to the front door, and another on the back, which gives contact down to the garden. This second curve is wrapped round the dining room to the left. Now, this is a highly inventive plan, and one which almost aggressively abandons the conventional boxiness of most modern work in the 30s. But Basil Ward's boldness doesn't end there. because in his three-dimensional translation of this idea, he picks out the circulation area by expressing the staircase as a glazed vertical element, which is locked into the entry curve. Using a framed structure has allowed Ward to expose the corners so that he makes an incision into the form which provides a terrace. He also sets one wing of the design lower than the other and cuts away the opposite end at the bottom, so that the building appears to be weakened at points where we would normally expect stability. He also introduces a curved external stair at this end. This is one of the four main curves which animate the design. They are, here at the side, the stairs that curve round the dining room window, the roof slab, and at the entrance. By using these curves, Basil Ward reinforces the vigour and excitement of the design as a whole. The space under the curved roof slab has in fact since been enclosed by a glass skin. The curve is still apparent, but as with high and over, it's really necessary, both visually and symbolically, for these designs to have a roof slab floating over the form, to give it lightness and an ethereal quality. The terrace adjoins the living room at first floor level, and the curve of the dining room window is a modern version of the traditional oriel window. By raising the living zone, the view towards the nearby golf course can be fully appreciated. At this point, the design is based on the idea of a glazed membrane wrapped around a structural frame. The pilotti are exposed inside, and the roof support beams too. Like New Farm, light floods into the house from the hall, which acts as the circulation spine. The house is not arranged on the open plan basis. Instead, the architect concentrates on individual rooms. This is the living room, which shows us that the forms were not chosen solely for aesthetic reasons. In fact, they were selected with the intention of providing a high level of amenity for their users, taking advantage of the site and its views. The vocabulary of the modern movement was expressed in the ribbon window, the glazed staircase, and the wire mesh balustrade, reminding us so much of an ocean liner. And here, set among the ventilation bricks for the kitchen larder, an expressionist porthole. The abstract patterns formed by these elements cause practical problems, as in the way the end terrace is exposed to the wind. Other problems with this vocabulary can be seen in the uneven weathering of the surfaces, and of course large expanses of glass can be too hot in summer and too cold in winter.
During the 30s, the architectural partnership of Connell, Ward and Lucas produced a whole series of designs that were as uncompromisingly modern as the two examples we've seen. Throughout the decade, they courageously explored the possibilities of the new materials, and their work somehow managed to convey the dynamism of modern art and the vitality of 20th century life. But I think it's true to say that this new architectural idiom evolved too rapidly, And many of the houses that were built in Britain during the 30s failed because of inadequate structural and environmental expertise. I think these houses were rejected by the public at large because the forms that were chosen by the architects failed symbolically to represent the idea of home in England. The dynamism of modern art was not easily transmitted into the form of buildings. And the results were sometimes too restless and visually disturbing to communicate on a human level. A sense of shelter, security, and happiness was often absent. And the high artistic and intellectual aspirations of the designers of these houses did not always coincide with the psychological and sometimes the practical needs of their users. But in retrospect, these deficiencies seem less important than the far-reaching implications of the new approach to design. Because during the 30s, architecture in Britain was purged of its former reliance on stylism based on the past, and the last links were broken with an arts and crafts-based philosophy. The period was transitional, the achievements more modest than those on the continent, and the monuments which remain are the physical evidence of the restless spirit of a decade.